Dawn breaks over the positions of the U.S. Army's 27th Infantry Division. In foxholes and trenches, soldiers and Marines prepare for what they know will be a decisive moment. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien of the 1st Battalion, 105th Infantry Regiment, grips two Colt M1911A1 pistols, each loaded with 7 rounds of 45 ACP ammunition. The mission is clear: survive the largest banzai attack of the Pacific War. At 0445 hours, the ground begins to shake. Through the pre-dawn darkness comes a deafening roar that survivors would never forget. Thousands of Japanese soldiers screaming as they charge straight toward American lines. Leading them are Imperial Japanese Army officers with their katana swords raised high, followed by wave after wave of troops armed with Arisaka rifles fixed with bayonets. Many carry the Type 14 Nambu pistol, the standard sidearm of Japan's imperial forces. What unfolds next highlights the striking difference between two nations' philosophies on personal combat, weapons, and why American troops wielded what many still regard as the most effective military sidearm ever made. The Colt M1911A1 had already earned a formidable reputation in World War I. Designed by the legendary John Moses Browning and adopted by the U.S. Army in 1911, it was a single-action recoil-operated pistol chambered in 45 ACP, a cartridge engineered for one purpose: stopping power. The 45 ACP fired a 230-grain bullet at roughly 830 feet per second from the M1911A1's 5-inch barrel. Although operating at relatively low pressure, around 21,000 psi, the heavy, slow-moving bullet produced tremendous terminal impact. The effect was simple and brutal. At close range, the round carried enough momentum to bring down a man instantly. The 230-grain bullet typically embedded itself upon impact instead of over-penetrating, making it exceptionally lethal in close combat, where one accurate shot could end a threat immediately. By 1944, American industry had produced nearly 1.9 million M1911A1 pistols for the war effort. Manufacturing was spread across several contractors: Colt, Remington Rand, Ithaca Gun Company, Union Switch and Signal, and even the Singer Sewing Machine Company, which made only 500 pistols before transferring its tools to other plants. This vast output ensured that U.S. forces were well supplied with dependable sidearms throughout the Pacific. The Marine Corps, recognizing the nature of close-quarters island warfare, had increased its authorized pistol allocation from 798 per division in 1942 to 1,779 by 1945. In the Pacific, where dense jungles and confined battlefields often made rifles and machine guns cumbersome, pistols became vital. Officers, NCOs, tank crews, artillerymen, and specialized units all carried the M1911A1 as a personal defense weapon. In contrast stood Japan's Type 14 Nambu pistol. Designed by Colonel Kajiro Nambu and introduced in 1926 during the 14th year of the Taisho era, it was Japan's attempt to modernize its sidearms. The Type 14 was a striker-fired semi-automatic pistol with an 8-round magazine and a 4.6-inch barrel. While it carried one more round than the M1911A1, the design suffered from several key flaws. It fired the 8.22mm Nambu cartridge, which launched a 100-grain bullet at around 1,000 feet per second. Though faster than the 45 ACP, the much lighter bullet delivered far less momentum and stopping power. The round's unique dimensions, a 321-inch bullet and bottlenecked casing, shared no compatibility with any other cartridge in the world, complicating logistics and limiting development. Japanese doctrine required officers to purchase their own sidearms, so affordability was a major concern. The Type 14 cost 78 yen, still expensive, but cheaper than the earlier 1 to 80 yen Type B Nambu. Even so, many Japanese officers entered combat with pistols ill-suited for sustained fighting against heavily armed enemies. The Nambu's shortcomings were serious. Its safety required both hands to operate, one to hold the weapon, another to manipulate the lever above the trigger guard, making it slow to ready in combat. The magazine often jammed when exposed to dirt or moisture, and because it lacked a slide stop, users couldn't easily tell when the pistol was empty. Worst of all, Its magazine disconnect feature prevented the gun from firing if the magazine was removed or damaged, rendering it useless in emergencies. By 1944, Japan had produced roughly 400,000 Type 14 Nambus since its introduction, far fewer than the nearly 2 million M1911A1s built by the US in just a few years. This disparity reflected the vast industrial gap between the two nations. That July morning would put both weapons to the test. Major McCarthy of the 27th Infantry Division later recalled the Japanese charge as resembling a cattle stampede, except the attackers never stopped coming. Many Japanese soldiers had spent the night drinking beer and sake, fully aware this would likely be their final battle. Lieutenant Colonel O'Brien was positioned directly in their path. As Japanese officers led the assault with drawn swords, he raised both of his M1911A1 pistols and began firing at point-blank range. The 45 ACP rounds tore through the charging troops, each shot stopping an attacker in his tracks. When both pistols were empty, 14 rounds spent, O'Brien had already been wounded in the shoulder, yet he kept fighting. Trusting the M1911A1's reliability, he knew each pull of the trigger would deliver a shot. Its simple, rugged design performed flawlessly, despite dirt, blood, and chaos. After running out of pistol ammunition, O'Brien mounted a Jeep's .50 caliber machine gun and continued defending his men. His stand allowed many to retreat and regroup. When the Japanese finally overran his position, more than 30 enemy bodies were found, nearby most felled by his precise pistol fire. During the opening attack, another account from that battle reveals the M1911A1's role as a last line of defense. Private Tom Baker, after expending all his rifle ammunition, used his weapon as a club until it broke. Wounded and unable to move, his comrades placed him against a tree, lit a cigarette for him, and handed him an M1911A1 loaded with 8 rounds, 7 in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. When his body was recovered, the pistol was empty, and 8 Japanese soldiers lay dead around him. Every shot had found its mark. These were not isolated incidents. Throughout the Pacific, the M1911A1 repeatedly proved its effectiveness. During the Guadalcanal campaign of 1942-43, a Japanese officer wielding a sword charged Admiral Archer Vander's command post. Marines armed with M1911A1 pistols stopped him instantly, their 45 rounds halting even the most determined attacks. The 45 ACP's stopping power was no accident. It was developed in response to U.S. military experience during the Philippine insurrection, 1899-1901, when troops armed with .38 caliber revolvers found their weapons ineffective against charging Moro warriors. Tests conducted in 1904 confirmed that only a .45 caliber round could reliably stop a determined opponent. From that conclusion came the cartridge and the legendary sidearm that would dominate battlefields for decades. The 45 ACP cartridge, when fired from the M1911A1, could disable an enemy regardless of where it struck, unlike smaller calibers that often wounded without stopping the target. Its psychological effect was nearly as powerful as its physical impact. The deep, heavy sound of the 45 ACP, combined with its visible results, created a strong impression on the battlefield. Japanese troops soon learned to recognize and fear the distinct, booming report of M1911A1 fire, which differed greatly from the sharper crack of smaller pistols. They understood that its sound usually meant immediate lethality. Captured Japanese military records confirmed this awareness. A diary found on Makin Atoll in November 1943 described the overwhelming power of American weapons. The officer wrote, "We know we are going to die, so we have no fear and remain high-spirited." Yet his notes also revealed clear recognition that Japanese forces were outmatched in both weapons and logistics. Each soldier carried nearly 45 kilograms of gear, about 87% of their body weight, while facing shortages in effective weapons and ammunition. Burdened by excessive loads and inferior equipment, Japan's troops increasingly depended on determination and sacrifice rather than tactical advantage. The Type 14 Nambu pistol, the standard sidearm for Japanese officers, reflected this broader problem. Designed in peacetime, it proved inadequate for the demands of total war. Manufacturing differences between nations further highlighted this divide. American M1911A1 production maintained strict quality control even under pressure. Parts from different manufacturers were fully interchangeable, ensuring quick field repairs. Durable parkerized finishes replaced earlier bluing, and grips were switched from checkered walnut to molded brown plastic to streamline production without compromising reliability. Japanese production of the Type 14, however, declined sharply in quality as the war continued. Late war models from the Torimatsu factory featured plain wooden grips to speed assembly, and overall workmanship deteriorated as Allied bombings and resource shortages crippled Japan's industry. Some pistols were still being produced as late as February 1945, even as American forces closed in on Japan's home islands. Ammunition logistics showed a similar imbalance. The U.S. produced vast quantities of 45 ACP ammunition with consistent standards and reliable performance. Specialized variants were also created, including the M12T23 shot cartridge for survival kits. It contained 118 pellets of birdshot, packed in red wax paper, enabling downed airmen armed with M1911A1 pistols to hunt small game. This was later replaced by the improved M15 shot cartridge, which used 108 pellets and offered better weather resistance. Japan, on the other hand, struggled to supply its 18-22mm Nambu ammunition. The cartridge's unique dimensions made substitution impossible, and as Allied attacks cut off supply lines, maintaining the Type 14 in service became increasingly difficult. Training further influenced battlefield results. American forces received thorough instruction in pistol marksmanship, emphasizing the weapon's role for officers and non-commissioned officers as both a defensive and secondary combat tool. The M1911A1's crisp single-action trigger aided accuracy, while its heavy all-steel frame helped control recoil from the powerful 45 ACP round. Japanese training, however, placed greater focus on traditional martial skills like swordsmanship and bayonet fighting. Though effective in close quarters, these methods required closing distance, something nearly impossible against American firepower. Many Japanese officers viewed the Type 14 more as a symbol of rank than a serious combat weapon, and their proficiency with it was limited. The M1911A1's reliability soon became legendary across the Pacific. It performed in the mud of Guadalcanal, the coral dust of Tarawa, the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, and the rain-soaked hills of Okinawa. Its straightforward, durable design allowed easy field maintenance even in harsh conditions. Stories of its dependability circulated widely among Marine and Army units. Pistols that had been submerged in salt water, buried in sand, or dropped from aircraft continued to function with minimal care. Critics sometimes noted its loose tolerances, but this design feature helped it operate even when clogged with debris, an essential advantage in Pacific environments. The Type 14's flaws were equally well known. Its tight mechanical tolerances and the magazine disconnect feature often rendered it useless when exposed to sand, mud, or salt water. Field maintenance was far more complicated than the M1911A1's straightforward disassembly process, making it unreliable under combat conditions. By late 1944, as American forces prepared for the invasion of Japan, the disparity in small arms performance was undeniable. U.S. troops carried M1911A1 pistols, refined through 3 years of combat experience. Battlefield feedback had improved their reliability and handling, while manufacturing standards remained high, despite the enormous production scale. Japanese forces, by contrast, faced severe shortages of ammunition, spare parts, and even basic weaponry. Many late war units relied on a mix of captured arms, outdated models, and hastily made replacements of poor quality. Despite 18 years of service, the Type 14 Nambu had never evolved to meet modern combat requirements. The invasion of Okinawa in April 1945 became the final and most brutal test of these weapons. Over 82 days of intense fighting, American troops encountered fierce resistance from defenders who knew this was Japan's last major line of defense. The U.S. suffered over 12,000 killed and 36,000 wounded. Japanese casualties were staggering, around 70,000 military deaths and between 100,000 to 150,000 civilian losses. The imbalance in small arms effectiveness exemplified by the M1911A1's dominance over the Type 14 Nambu, played a decisive role in the outcome of the Pacific War. U.S. Marines and soldiers equipped with the M1911A1 pistol could confidently engage close-range targets, knowing their weapon was both reliable and lethal. The psychological effect this pistol had on Japanese forces was significant. Captured documents and post-war interviews revealed that Japanese troops developed a deep respect for American firepower, especially for the devastating impact of the .45 caliber round. The distinct sound of the M1911A1 became synonymous with deadly precision, influencing both enemy morale and tactical choices. As American planners prepared for Operation Downfall, the projected invasion of Japan in November 1945, they anticipated intense urban combat, where sidearms would be indispensable. The M1911A1's proven success in close-quarters fighting made it a vital weapon for the expected street battles across Japanese cities. Although the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki brought the war to an end before the invasion began, the M1911A1's legacy was already firmly secured. From the trenches of France to the shores of the Pacific, it had repeatedly demonstrated its value under the harshest conditions. Post-war evaluations revealed the vast disparity in small arms production between the United States and Japan. Nearly 2 million M1911A1 pistols were produced during the war, while Japan's Type 14 Nambu pistol production, spanning almost 2 decades, barely exceeded 400,000 units. This 5:1 ratio reflected not only a manufacturing gap but also the larger industrial imbalance that ultimately shaped the war's outcome. The 45 ACP cartridges' performance in Pacific combat ensured its continued use by U.S. Special Operations Forces long after the M1911A1 was retired as the standard-issue sidearm. Its unmatched stopping power made it irreplaceable in close combat, where immediate threat elimination was essential. Meanwhile, Japanese Type 14 Nambu pistols became prized war trophies among American servicemen. Their distinct design and association with enemy officers made them popular souvenirs, despite their inferior performance. Many veterans brought them home as mementos, often unaware that they had carried far superior weapons in battle. The contrast between the M1911A1 and the Type 14 Nambu reflected far more than differing design philosophies. It symbolized the fundamental gap in industrial capability, tactical doctrine, and understanding of modern warfare. The American pistol was the result of systematic engineering and lessons learned from prior conflicts, supported by massive industrial capacity. In contrast, the Nambu, though an improvement over earlier Japanese sidearms, was limited by Japan's relatively recent industrialization and constrained resources for testing and refinement. The Nambu's flaws mirrored Japan's broader military struggles: poor logistics, declining production quality, and a reliance on fighting spirit over technological advantage. For American troops in the Pacific, the M1911A1 offered more than just a weapon. It provided assurance of equipment superiority. Knowing that their sidearms could neutralize any opponent with a single accurate shot influenced morale and decision-making in combat. In life-or-death engagements, this confidence often made the difference between survival and defeat. The legacy of the M1911A1 in the Pacific War goes beyond technical data or production statistics. It became a symbol of American industrial power and professional military effectiveness. Its performance against Japanese forces demonstrated the decisive role of technological superiority in modern conflict. Accounts of soldiers like Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien and Private Tom Baker, who used their M1911A1s to devastating effect in their final moments, became part of military legend. Verified reports showed how training, skill, and dependable equipment could achieve extraordinary results on the battlefield. The .45 ACP round fired from the M1911A1 stopped banzai charges, neutralized infiltrators, and served as a final line of defense in desperate situations. In the brutal close-quarters fighting typical of the Pacific Campaign, its reliability and stopping power proved critical. Despite their bravery and resolve, Japanese soldiers were consistently outmatched, not only in overall firepower, but also in the effectiveness of their individual weapons. The Nambu pistol, with its underpowered cartridge and mechanical weaknesses, simply could not compete with an American sidearm engineered for battlefield dominance. The ballistic disparity was undeniable. A 230-grain bullet, traveling at 830 feet per second, delivered far more momentum and stopping power than a 100-grain projectile at 1,000 feet per second. Across millions of engagements, this advantage translated into tangible tactical superiority. The M1911A1's success validated John Moses Browning's original design and the U.S. military's adoption of the .45 ACP cartridge. It proved that rigorous design, proper testing, and large-scale production could yield a battlefield advantage impossible to counter through courage alone. For Japan, the Nambu's shortcomings underscored a broader strategic issue: the difficulty of waging modern industrial warfare against a technologically advanced nation. Japan's reliance on morale and improvisation could not offset its lack of resources and production capacity. The Pacific War ultimately proved that in the age of mechanized conflict, quality and quantity of equipment often determined victory. Supported by overwhelming industry, American forces gradually eroded Japanese resistance through material and technological dominance. The impact of the .45 ACP round extended well beyond World War II, shaping U.S. military doctrine for decades. Even after the M1911A1 was officially replaced by the Beretta M9 in 1985, elite special operations units continued to favor .45 caliber pistols for missions demanding maximum stopping power. The lessons learned in the Pacific, that survival depended on instantly neutralizing threats, continued to influence weapon design and combat philosophy. Ultimately, the story of the M1911A1 and the Type 14 Nambu represents more than a comparison of two pistols. It illustrates the defining truth of 20th century industrial warfare. Nations capable of designing and mass-producing superior weapons consistently held the upper hand. In the hands of individual soldiers, that difference became a matter of life and death. The M1911A1's performance in the Pacific secured its place in military history as a symbol of reliability, engineering excellence, and American combat effectiveness. Its superior ballistics, 230 grains at 830 feet per second versus Japan's 100-grain round at 1,000, summed up the conflict in numerical form. Overwhelming power backed by unmatched production. Across thousands of encounters, that advantage helped shape the outcome of the Pacific War and solidified the M1911A1's reputation as one of the most successful sidearms in military history.